Hi, everybody. It's Abbie Aamiotte here with Dr. John Bell from Welshire Presbyterian Church in Denver, Colorado. This is Tabletop Theology, a lighthearted conversation about serious topics.
Yay!
Yay! Hi, John.
Hello, Abbie. So this is Thursday. The inauguration was
Thursday.
yesterday, and that seems like a world away now.
I know. It's been a week.
Quite a week. Nothing bad happened, at least in terms of violence to the capitals or in DC. So we didn't know what to expect when we scheduled this appointment, but I think we're in the clear.
Yeah, usually we record on Wednesdays and publish Thursdays. And we decided this week we might just wait and see. But I'm so glad that this is sort of just a peaceful, happy time to chat.
We thought this might be about the apocalypse. And,
right.
But gosh, we're in a decent place for a theological conversation today.
It's great. Last week we talked about courage, and we sort of started in on humility a little bit. So we thought we might just keep going and talk about humility this week.
Sure. I'm sure you have lots of questions.
I'll try to think of more. Like we had such a good topic last week.
I told my sisters in our Zoom conference on Sunday, I said, this is totally unscripted. They're like, doesn't that scare you? And I was like, yeah, it does. So humility. Well, I'll start. To me, it's the lost topic in America in our generation. We think of modern psychology of having self-esteem and being proud of what you do. And of course, our kids are given trophies for participation, and we're afraid to rank people 1, 2, 3 because someone's feelings might get hurt. So you're all winners, and to take your place in the world. And humility is not really taught. In fact, in Bill Bennett's Book of Virtues, it's a big book. Bill Bennett was the Secretary, I think, of Education many years ago, fairly respected. He wrote a book of virtues, and oddly, humility is not even a chapter. It doesn't even rank. And I thought, what a telling statement on America in our day, is that humility is just not considered a virtue. And yet the Bible's full of exhortations to be humble and to live your life humbly.
Well, it is. We do kind of see it.
Does that inspire a question, Abbie?
It does inspire a question, because we sort of say of like being humbled as a negative thing. Like it's, oh, I've been humbled by that. I have to take a step back. Is it pretty negative in the Bible when that happens? I mean, I know God knocks people down a peg every now and again, but how should we approach the feeling of being humbled as Christians?
Well, I think perhaps, and again, especially it may have a negative connotation, and to be humbled, egg in your face, failed. In the Bible, I don't think it has that connotation. It's really the opposite of arrogance. And it's easy to think of arrogance as a bad thing. Aloof, uncaring, not concerned about anybody but yourself, pushed to the farthest, narcissist. We've talked a lot about that in the last 4 years. Moving along. So arrogance, is clearly a bad thing. So I think of humble as being the opposite of arrogant. It doesn't mean having a debased understanding of who you are. It means having a sober assessment of who you are, understanding your place in creation and in the world and in relation to others, We are not gods. We are not the center of our universe. And I think to be humble is a way of understanding that. Humble has the root word in Latin, humus or humus, which is dirt, having the understanding that we are, to use a good word, grounded, I think is the best way to understand that, having your feet on the earth, grounded. And I think to be humble is to have that kind of understanding of yourself that in relation to the creation. I think the best way to be humbled is to go stand on the beach and look at the ocean, and see how small we are in relation to the ocean and the pounding surf and the earth. We're fortunate to live in the Rocky Mountain region. We can just walk outside. In fact, right here, I can see the Rocky Mountains and see the snow caps and the splendor of creation, and recognize that, we are not the center of creation. We are not God's small g or big G. We are a participant in the universe and not a big part of it. And yet, as Psalm 8 says, we are created yet a little lower than the angels, or a little lower than God, depending on the translation. So small but important in creation in relation to our God.
Well, I like that, of this idea of being grounded, because I think a lot of the times, kind of going back to that negative connotation, to be humble is to be self-deprecating almost in a lot of like our cultural things. Like I remember very distinctly as a kid when someone would compliment me and I would say thank you, that people thought I was arrogant, as opposed to being like, oh no, you have to kind of push back and say, no, that's not true. And that would be considered more humble. So I think it's a really lovely thought of, this is actually how we can consider our global citizenship almost. Of humility requires a grounding of understanding we're just one small part of a human civilization.
Well, what you said makes me think of laughter, because there's a way to laugh which is arrogant, which laughing at others, like aren't you stupid, ha 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 ha, aren't you unworthy, ha 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 ha, and laughing at others for their weakness. But I think properly, self-deprecating humor, the ability to laugh at yourself, is an important quality, because we're not perfect, and we're not all ones on the Enneagram, where if we're not perfect, there's something wrong with us. We're not perfect. And the ability to laugh at ourselves and our mistakes and our shortcomings, I think is a strong sign of what I would consider biblical or proper humility. In Philippians 2, which is it's often called the Christ hymn. Some think it's the earliest Christian creed that Paul was quoting. A lot we don't know, but it's a beautiful summarization of Christ and what's expected of Christians. And in that Christ hymn in Philippians 2, Paul, exhorts us to be like Christ. And, Christ humbled himself and picked up the cross. He didn't think of equality with God as something to be exploited, but humbled himself, picked up the cross, and was obedient even unto death. And I think that obedience is also a sign of humility, because to be obedient means, you have a law, you have a master, you have someone to answer to. You're subservient to someone other than yourself. And I think to understand that to be Christ-like, we are not to count equality with God as something to be exploited or abused, but to humble ourselves, to obey the dictates or the exhortations of Jesus Christ, and to be obedient even unto death, even death on the cross, is what Christ him says. So to me, that's to be humbled in the way of Christ, to follow Christ, is the meaning of what true humility really is. But as I'm talking, I was thinking in my own life, there probably was a shift. I mean, I think humility was important when I was a kid, and then I tried to remember as I came up on this conversation. In the 60s, it seemed to like change, and Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, who changed his name to Muhammad Ali, he would get on the TV with Howard Cosell, and he would just like hold his fist up as a boxer, and I'm the greatest that's ever been. I am the best. And he would talk about how great he was and how infallible he was, and I loved Muhammad Ali, I still do, and thought he always did it with a little tongue in his cheek. He always had a little grin. He was sort of smirking. You thought he was being funny, but I think the kids bought into it. And after that, Joe Namath was a sports star who was the same way. He was a quarterback, played for the New York Jets, and they were supposed to lose the Super Bowl. He said, "We're number one, we'll win," predicted it, and they did. And it's like, arrogance is an important quality. I should be arrogant.
Confidence.
And so I think something changed in the 60s and 70s, and the whole culture of self-esteem too. There's nothing wrong with self-esteem. Don't get me wrong. I think it's important to have self-esteem. Very important to have self-esteem. But when that bridges over to what I call arrogance, we've left what I think is the call to the Christian. There's a great parable about when you go to a banquet. I think it's Luke 14. When you go to a banquet, don't go sit in the best spot at the table, lest the host come and say to you, "I'm sorry, this was reserved. Your table's in the back."
Yeah.
But when you go to a banquet, sit in the lowest spot, the back spot, the most humble spot. And then the master can come up to you and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Abbie, come up and sit next to me." And the whole thing concludes with, those who humble themselves will be exalted, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled. And I think that's important teaching in the Christian faith. So humble, if you want to be exalted, which is not a bad goal, humility is the path to exaltation. If Christians thought of that, then seeking ways to be humble is important. Stream of consciousness here. John Templeton, who was the founder of the Templeton Funds and thought to be, I believe, the real founder of the mutual fund industry, was a Presbyterian elder and very involved in Princeton Seminary, Princeton College and Seminary, supportive of theological things for Princeton Presbyterians, started the Templeton Award for religion and other things. But some of his works, and he didn't author them all, he funded them, but is the principle that arrogance is the main barrier to spiritual development. That when we're arrogant, we're blind to God, we're blind to others, we're blind to needs, we're blind to the spiritual world around us. But humility is the main avenue for spiritual progress, he would say, or his books that he funded to be published would say. And so humility theology or humility religion was very important, or is very important, to the Templeton Foundation. And I totally subscribe to that theory. People who, think they know it all, are the very ones who get us in trouble and give Christianity a bad name.
Well, I think that's kind of where it came up in our courageous conversation of being willing to admit we're wrong is a humbling thing and takes courage to do. I mean, as a church, we're doing a lot on facing racism right now, and that is humbling as a white person experiencing this. And I think in a good way and in a holy way in a lot of instances to experience that. And also I want to give a little plug for Sunday, because it's so funny how these kinds of things all work together. I've been thinking about Jonah, and Jonah is kind of a story of humility. And that's one of the passages for this Sunday, I believe I saw doing the order of worship this week. And I think Jonah lacked humility in believing that other people were worthy of being saved as well. And I think that that's something I've had to work on, of just being humble to see the humanity in other people who vehemently disagree with me. I think that there takes some humility there.
Well, as you said earlier in the broadcast, our schedule's off this week because we didn't know what was going to happen on Wednesday with the threat of violence and the inauguration. But normally I would have preached my sermon by now, but Abbie, I'm still working on it. So I guess I'm now going to have to put Jonah.
Got to bring Jonah in
the sermon.
I think it's in the children's moment at least. So it's now there. But I thought about it too, because my son loves the VeggieTales Jonah soundtrack, and he listened to that this morning. So it just kind of became a thing today. Apparently I'm supposed to be thinking about Jonah today. So that's what I'm doing.
And I'll second what you said. Jonah's a great story, a really great story. The kids like the whale part, but it is about arrogance. It's about Jewish pride and religious pride and finger pointing at Nineveh, and condemnation of Nineveh, and looking down upon Nineveh and being arrogant, and not willing to humble yourself in terms of what God was asking Jonah to do. And then the self-pity at the end of Jonah is one of my favorite little scenes, where he's in the sun and the bush grows up and shades him, and the bush dies, and he's mad at God because he doesn't have shade. And God says, well, should I not have compassion for Nineveh, as well as you? I mean, it's just a great. It's unfortunate some of these Old Testament stories are 4 chapters in length, 5 chapters in length. Right. It'd be great to do the whole thing, but you only give me like 18 minutes before
I cut you off.
Attention span runs out. Anyway, I think that's about it on humility.
Yeah, I think that we did a lot, and we'll be back next week with more tabletop theology. Got to figure out what we're going to talk about.
I'm sure we'll come up with something.
We'll come up with something. But thank you all for tuning in today. As always, reach out with your questions, comments. We love to hear from you. And we'll see you next time. Bye, John.
Bye.